welcome back to Poddin My Noggin. So this week we have a really cool guest. I'm very excited that she is here. I also, just for everybody at home, had sort of like a off the cuff therapy session with her, and I'm feeling much better about it all. So I think she has a lot of wonderful things that she can share with us today. I'm going to pronounce her name and I'm going to try it. And she's going to tell me if I did it incorrectly. But we have the wonderful Lita Mitrofanis.
Perfect.
I did it good?
Yeah,
Perfect.
perfect. Spot on.
Well, welcome, Lita, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And it was great to have our little intro chat
Yeah,
off the record.
yes, it was. It did a lot of good for me in that 15, 20 minutes to just sort of kind of, it was sort of a reaffirmation, but it was an external validation, I think, a reminder, if you will, that
Yes. Yeah.
we
A
have so much.
reminder is always the best way to say it.
Yes, a reminder. So Lita is this fascinating woman who has a lot of experience and education, and she is, how can I say it? My understanding. She's going to teach us and talk today about how our nuclear families and and certain societal subscriptions that we subscribe to, if you will, throughout our childhood kind of interferes with our ability to be our true selves. Would you say that I got that?
Yes, I would
Yeah.
say that that's pretty accurate.
All right. So, Lita, first off, you know, tons of things that we spoke about in 20 minutes that was just profound to me and really beneficial. But how did you get to this space?
Well, it's interesting. And I think the best way to explain it is by tracing back, right?
Okay.
So I've just released my first book. And it's the first book in a series of 4 books.
Okay.
And I call it The Human Case of Mistaken Identity because we are living almost what you would call a false identity in a way, right?
Okay.
And my work as a self-development counselor, actually, I started off in integrative nutritional counseling and it segued from there. The more I worked with people nutritionally and with their diet and their food, most people eat emotionally. And
Mm-hmm.
so that really got me more into exploring the social emotional side of their life. And, it was just kind of constant digging, constant digging, constant digging. And eventually it just organically morphed on its own, my practice. And I call myself a self-development counselor because what I actually do is work with the human trifecta of mind, body, spirit, but in a very tangible way, and bringing that into integration and harmony. And it's helping people to return to their own sense of truth because we are socially conditioned as human beings. We born into our nuclear family. We're socially conditioned based on our culture, our ethnicity, our race, our geographical location, our socioeconomic background, and we internalize the messages. And as we try to fit in, we start to, and in order to survive, right, we start to mold and adapt ourselves according to what we feel is expected of us. And a lot of times, the messages that we internalize as children, whether they're from our parents, other caregivers, extended family, coaches, and then eventually society at large, right? It starts to form what we call our human identity. But the actual book focuses on our spiritual identity. And the reason being is because in the mind, body, spirit realm, we don't focus on the spiritual aspect of our being tangibly. And I'm not talking about religion here. We're going beyond religion. This is our who we are as our identity, our core essence. We are spiritual beings having a temporary physical existence, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have a
And
question
go
for you.
ahead.
when you tell people what you do, as you just did, right? The first, the mind, body, spirit piece,
Mm-hmm.
do you get mixed reactions?
Yes, sometimes I do. Some people think, oh, another airy fairy, another new
Mm,
ager, another woohooer. And I laugh because it's none of that. Because my background is as a health educator. You know, I have my master's degree, all my workshops and seminars. I've taught for many years. I've had my practice for many years. And it's a combination of, it's sort of a marriage between psychology and spirituality.
I love that. And the reason I asked that is because when you said it, now I knew what you were going to say because like we had a little conversation before the
Mm-hmm.
show started. When I'm filming the show, I always try and think about what a listener or a viewer
Mm-hmm.
may think in their mind when they hear a specific sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I always think to myself, okay, so would they automatically be then, oh, airy fairy or new ager or something like that? Would they automatically go to discount or discredit this approach because they don't they haven't bought into it, right? And like
Right.
modern day medicine, education, all of that stuff
Right, right,
really
right.
doesn't hold that space as something that's credible. But for anybody listening at home, the spiritual component of this is what we feel innately, correct?
Hmm.
Like it's the
It's our innate identity.
yes. So it's not hoo ha. It's not airy fairy. It's as important as say our physical health, if not
Hmm.
more important. Because I would say I would liken that it's more of what our soul represents
Correct.
than our say
Correct.
minds and body. Okay. So
Right.
that was my one question. So anybody looking at listening at home, it's not new age. It's
No, it's not. You know, and there's been a lot of distortion. Unfortunately, you know, many people have jumped on this bandwagon and there's been a lot of distortion. But I guess to sum it up in a couple of sentences is that you innately, all of us, you, me, everybody, we are spiritual beings with a soul incarnated as a human form. And when we talk about our inner identity, this is the place or the space where we tap into our inner wisdom, our guidance. This is where our sense of value and stability comes from, right? When people say, oh, you know, I just had a gut feeling, my intuition told me X. Well, where is that coming from? You know, or I was inspired to do X. Well, where is inspiration coming from? If you break the word down, it's in spirit, right? It's in spirit, inspiration. You know, we're using it, we just don't know we're using it. So I'm not talking about, you know, anybody's preferred organized religion, and I'm not talking about the New Age um, movement at all. I'm talking about as human beings, we have our body and we know how we have so much information, right? We know what's good for our body, what we should do to have optimal well being. We're kind of figuring out the mind body connection and our mental state and how that affects our well being. So we also have our spiritual state. That's the third part of this. And because we keep ignoring it, you know, we are not harmonized, and what we also don't understand is that's the stabilizing factor of our human trifecta, right? And it makes it a lot easier for people to understand when we start actually getting into the nitty gritty of daily life and how we're living and breaking it down. And, you know, there are so many aspects of this, and I talk about this in the book. My second book, Self Love, The Journey Home, is going to be out in a few months. And I talk a lot about how do we come down to self love? What does that mean? And because that too is now becoming another trend word, but
Mhm.
it's a combination of things, right? It's self care is the manifestation of self love, but we're talking about radical honesty. We're talking
Yes.
about knowledge of the self and acknowledgement of the self. What does that really mean? We're talking about self-trust. We're talking about self-forgiveness. And then we can lead into radical self-acceptance of every part of ourselves, the good, bad, and the ugly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then from there, once we start to really work on this, and I explain how we break that down, and it's a bit of a process, right? And then from there, as we start to incorporate all of these factors, unconditional self-love becomes the byproduct as we keep moving forward.
And I love that because,
Yeah.
and you're correct, where self-love has become a trending word, and there is a lot of distortion in the space um, currently,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's talking about, you know, self-love, and you have all of those things, but like it doesn't really teach you how to give self-love. And what if there's a part of something inside you that you can't reconcile, right? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't teach you the skills and the techniques to actually go in there and actually figure out all of the steps that you just said, and
Mm-hmm.
then come to radical self-acceptance.
Right.
My message is always to be kind to yourself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
my approach and journey differs a little bit more than what you're saying right now, but now I want to read your books, and because there's probably components of your books that's going to help me come in even further than I am today.
Mm-hmm.
But it was about, you know, going in and recognizing all of the things that I didn't like about myself, and choosing to love myself anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and working on changing those things and those beliefs. Want to go back to, for anybody at home, and I'm going to link this in the description, simplyleda.com, and that's so simply, and then leda.com, is a treasure trove of wonderful information. And you can look at, and one of the things that I really love, Leda, is that you broke down your name in an acronym on your
Oh,
site. Was
yeah.
that was on
I forgot
purpose?
about
I'm
that. Yes,
assuming.
it's my tabs. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I love that. So it's, you know, Leda. If you click on that one, you're gonna find Leda's story. Then there's educate, discern, and act. And there's a lot of really great things in here. One of the things that I love the most, and you've mentioned this already, is that, and now I have to try and remember if you mentioned it off recording or in recording, because my brain sometimes omits things. But your belief system is that we are born with purpose,
Mm-hmm.
an innate set of beliefs and skills, or
Well, we all come in with our unique gifts and talents, right? And we all
yes.
have certain archetypes that we tap into during the course of our lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when we are born and we come into the human identity, right? We come in with a memory of where we just came from. So you only need to look at an infant or a baby to sort of see how they move very naturally and organically, right? There's no self consciousness, there's no thought process that says, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve. They don't have any of these thoughts that we adopt as we move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those come from as we try to fit into our human culture. And we can learn a lot by watching babies and infants as they move, and small children. So, you have children. Do you ever see a baby who's crawling on the floor and they're babbling as if they're talking to someone? Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
probably because they do still see someone there, right? They are talking to someone. It's just that we don't see them. They've just come in from the spiritual realm. And so they can't, they're in an adaptation phase. Sometimes we see children up until 6, 7, 8 years old that have an imaginary friend. Well, who's the imaginary friend? And we sort of dismiss this as conjurings of the mind, or when a baby talks, it's nonsensical conversation. I mean, I've seen children point to something where no one is standing there and say, well, don't you see them?
Mm,
So when we look at these, all of these messages, and we see all of this evidence, right? We already know that we come in from a spiritual realm. And most religions in the world will all tell you we are spiritual beings. So we don't need to reestablish that. It's sort of established. But what happens now when we come into our nuclear family,
mm,
right? Every nuclear family has their belief systems, right? And they raise us in a way depending on where we live and how we live. And we start to adapt because we do want to please our parents or our caregivers. And so they teach us, they become the authority, right? We are also reliant and dependent on them. So they will tell you, this is how we do this. This is how we do X. This is what is right. This is what is wrong. And, all of this social conditioning starts from that age. And the question is, how do we internalize those messages that we're receiving? So, what we do need, the most critical thing to understand is the messages we receive can be negative or positive, or we can interpret them negatively or positively, right? And we do that by watching the demeanor of the parent. So, we know when we've done something that is displeasing to someone else, to our parent. So, we modify our behavior. Subconsciously, there's something that tells us, oh, wait, we're not going to do that anymore because they don't like that, even if it doesn't resonate with the child. How many times have you heard children, they're like, no, you tell them something, they say no, or they say no all the time, right? No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do this. No, it's like they say you have to learn how to say no before you say yes.
yes.
So that no is their way of telling us that this is really not how it is. Meaning, you know, when a parent says to you, let me make one distinction first. So many times a child doesn't distinguish between I'm doing something bad and I am bad. So when and most of us do this because that's how we're raised humanly, we just say, oh, you know what? So and so, John, you did something, you're a bad boy or you're a bad girl. But what the child internalizes is I am bad. It doesn't distinguish between I did a bad thing and I
Mm,
am bad. So when they start internalizing, I am bad because I did this, I am bad because I did that, I am bad because I did that. That's how we start to adapt and morph our behavior moving forward. And we figure out what the expectation is. And depending how we feel about that, then we can get either resistant or accepting.
and it's just layer on top of layer of sort of faulty assumption because of the messaging that we're receiving, right?
Right, right. And we also have to understand sometimes positive messaging can be very hurtful. If we set very high standards for someone that they can't live up to, or we say to them, oh gosh, you're super smart. You're always going to be super smart, or you're always going to be, beautiful or thin or, social or whatever it is that we're, describing, that adds a layer of pressure as the kids grow up that they have to live up to.
Because it's
So
still a
it can
belief.
work, right. So when we speak to our children, even if we're saying something positive, we still have to be in authenticity. We don't want to overcompensate. We have to be in neutrality and we have to be in authenticity, and we have to be able to back up what we say with our actions, right? Consistency in that respect is key. So it's sort of many people think it's a slippery slope, but what actually happens is that when, for example, I grew up with, my parents were immigrants, right? And when they came here, survival was of the utmost importance, right? So the nuances of parenthood weren't that important. And I don't hold that against them, because, as an adult, you realize that every parent does the best they can in the moment they're in, with the knowledge that they have in that moment. And if they are struggling with, keeping up with the Joneses, or if they're struggling to make a living, or, they too are carrying baggage from their childhood.
Mm.
Let's not forget that, because they too were children once, and
Yep.
they pass down onto their kids what they learned, and they parent for the most part the way their parents parented, because we parent subconsciously. Unless you're really parenting consciously, and you're really paying attention and saying, I'm not going to do that and I'm going to do it differently. We by default just go with what we know and what's
Which I
already
think you're,
imprinted in us from
I
our
think,
own parents.
I think you're seeing more of that now in our current sort of generation of parents. The younger ones are practicing more mindful
Mm-hmm.
parenting,
Yeah,
and which is
absolutely.
so important because like, when you were just talking about like even the positive, like anything you're saying to a child as a parent, caregiver,
Mm-hmm.
guardian, what coach is creating belief systems
Mm-hmm.
within that person. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like, for parents listening today, if you're out there and you're raising your children, be mindful when delivering messages that are either good or bad and how they may affect a child's belief systems. Now, there has to be grace for parents because we're
Of
also
course. Of
looking at
course.
that because parenting's hard, especially now. Like you're trying to keep the lights on because the
Right.
inflation's so high and everything costs so much money and all of that stuff. So it's really hard to be, say, present as a parent when you're so concerned about if you're going to have, longevity and put food on the table. So,
Right. It's not just that. That is certainly a consideration. And the generations before us, the ones who came over and started their life here, again, that's why I brought up my parents as an example. So survival was of the utmost importance. Um, you know, there is a grace for parents, because also in today's society, we have social media. We have technology on a completely different level. And the influence of that and the draw of that and the distractions that we're living with today weren't that present 1 and 2 generations ago.
mm,
And a lot of parents feel that as they try to keep up with their jobs, with their, child rearing, with, maybe taking care of elderly parents, that they have, there's so many responsibilities that things just naturally going to slip through the cracks. But the key is to become aware. And this is, children act as our mirror. And when a child will always reflect back to you whatever you're going to say. And every parent knows this.
yes.
So if you are in a moment where you are having a tough day, or you're having a tough year, right? Or, overall, you're not parenting the way maybe you would like to parent in an ideal world, right? Your children are always going to kind of show you um, where you are not in alignment. And the beauty of that is our children trigger us many times. But that's not for us to say, they're not being sassy or insubordinate. Basically, what they're actually doing is giving us a gift. Because if we as parents perceive and say, okay, wait a second, my child just told me something that I really didn't want to hear about myself, and I'm angry or I'm annoyed because my child actually hit the nail on the head. So instead of punishing them or yelling at them, as the case might be, maybe I can shift the paradigm of how I'm perceiving this and saying, you know what, my child just gave me an amazing gift for me to look into my own wounds, to look into my own inner child wound, to look and see, why am I triggered? If
Mm,
somebody's telling me something and I'm triggered, that has nothing to do with the messenger, but
it's-
and everything to do with the receiver.
yes.
So if I'm triggered because somebody told me something, that means that somewhere I'm living an untruth about myself. There's something that I need to look at. What is it that I need to look at? And what my child just did, or my friend, or my spouse, or my colleague at work, what they're doing is they're showing me where I need to look at a belief system that I'm harboring or a wound that I still hold on to that's not serving me anymore. So in this respect, it becomes a gift. And it's just about learning a different way of moving in the world and behaving in the world,
I'm
right?
realizing now that I gave my parents a lot of gifts when I was coming up as a child.
Right. But,
Don't
and
think
you know
they
what? We
ever
all
saw it
do.
that way, but yeah, I was that defiant child,
Hmm.
and you know, there it worked both ways, really,
Right.
in that situation. But that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because if we are being triggered by something our children say to us, then why are we being triggered?
Right.
And it's that pause and to stop and to think about how that is. So, yeah, love that for any parents that are listening or watching. Like, maybe the
And
next time this happens, pause, ask why.
right. And not just that, and it's not just for the parent child relationship, it's for any relationship because
Yes.
we learn when we rub up against each other,
Hmm.
right? So it's any relationship. It could be a friend, a work colleague, it could be someone in your community that's an acquaintance that just says something to you and it rubs you the wrong way. And I always say this, when you're triggered, if something is bothering you, if you're going to go home and you're going to spin and spin and spin about it, that means that somewhere within you that you feel that that person hit upon a truth or maybe even an untruth, but certainly something you need to look at. Some belief system you're harboring that's not serving you.
Yeah.
So as humans, we tend to react instead of pausing and choosing to act, right? So when we are in reaction and someone says something to us that might annoy us or trigger us, we'll say something back. We'll give some response, right? And that response would be one of annoyance, or we might, be curt with that person or whatever it is. But if we just stopped and didn't respond at all, and remember, not responding is also a response, and just sat there for 10 seconds and said, okay, this is telling me something, then you don't hold it against that person anymore. You can just say, okay, great, I gotta go. See ya. Disconnect, whatever. If the conversation has nowhere to go, then you can just disengage from that conversation. And then at a later time, ask yourself, okay, now what just really happened here? And you have to ask yourself the questions. And you can't be afraid of that. Even if it takes you to a place that you don't want to look at yourself, even if it takes you to a place of pain or shame or guilt, because the only way to heal that is by bringing it out into the light. You have to bring it into your awareness. And when you bring it into your awareness, then you can start to figure out, what can I do with it? So you have to identify it first. And then once you identify it, then we can start to see, do I have a pattern of doing this? Where has this happened before? And then you start that process of tracing back. So where did this originate from? Did it come from my childhood? Where did I pick up this belief system? Is it working for me? And the most important question of all is it true? Is it true? Is it something that I truly created and believed from an experience that I had? Or did it come from somebody else telling me something about myself that was their perception of me, not my perception of me?
So I'm making notes over here because
I know, I see.
my homework list for the weekend's getting bigger. I find this really interesting too, because as we continue to talk, I'm learning so much more about things that I haven't been necessarily conscious of,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're talking about triggers as an adult from friends, from if you're a parent, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having a conversation with one of my best friends yesterday evening, and they
Mm-hmm.
made this pretty innocuous comment. But for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, how it was delivered and exactly what was said triggered me
Mm-hmm.
into a sense of sort of almost anger or bitterness, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I paused because I try not to address things immediately.
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, when something were to happen with one of my direct reports, I always had a 24-hour rule.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule was if they did something that was ludicrous, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like something that you wouldn't expect an adult to do in their
Mm-hmm.
role, I would not respond to it the day that it happened. I
Mm-hmm.
would wait 24 hours because when I
Mm-hmm.
do respond to it, I want it to be from a non emotional place or state of
Mm-hmm.
mind. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to approach it objectively and with kindness. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that when you're fired up or you're having an emotional charge about something that you can be objective in trying to understand how something were to happen. So I just made that comment as a note, right? That I
Mm-hmm.
need to ask myself, why did that offend me?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that trigger me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's something that I'm not aware of, an untruth or a truth that I haven't addressed. So
Right.
for everybody listening at home, I think we're really just it's really brilliant. So we're going into adulthood now. Like, let's say
Mm-hmm.
we're in our 20s and 30s and
Mm-hmm.
we're not finding satisfaction, or we're still abiding by rules. And you said something, I've been trying to discreetly find the exact wording that you said. Um,
When we
on your,
move into an adulthood, and I'm sure it'll come to you, but when we move into adulthood, we take all our belief systems, right? And our behaviors. Now we have to remember that our behaviors stem from our belief systems. And
yes.
we take all of that moving forward with us into our adulthood, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I get asked the question a lot of how, if it's subconscious, and how do I know what I'm harboring, right? And that's a great question. And the simple way is that you will eventually start to see patterns show up. And patterns look like the same play or the same scene over and over with a different set of characters. And a lot of times, depending on if we have friends that are honest with us, they will say to us, why do you always do that when you get angry? Or why do you always do that when someone tries to give you a compliment? People will always tell us. And when we start hearing the same feedback over and over, we know we have a pattern.
Mm,
And that pattern is indicative of a belief system that we're harboring that we need to look at. Right? And it's just about, and we need to look at it from a space of neutrality. This is very important, almost as if you were the witness to your own life. Because when we're emotionally triggered and fired up, we don't have clarity.
mm-hmm.
And what the space that we want to move into is one of observation and discernment, not judgment and criticism. We live in the world of judgment and criticism, especially today more than ever,
Especially with
right?
social media.
Yeah, yeah. And it's very debilitating and diminishing. And, you know, it can, kill people's self esteem and their sense of self worth. Most belief systems boil down to three. If we kind of keep tracing them back, they come to like three core belief systems, which are I don't deserve, I'm not good enough, and I'm unworthy. And when when you start peeling off those layers of the behaviors, of the belief system, we keep peeling them back and say, okay, so where did that originate from? How is that making us feel? When someone is criticizing us, whether a little bit or constantly, when we're constantly told we're doing something wrong, we move into a space subconsciously where we feel we have to keep fixing ourselves,
Mhm.
and we have to keep redeeming ourselves, or we have to keep proving ourselves. So, and most people prove themselves with their achievements,
Yes.
right? So, because the point that we've missed is that our sense of value is inherent. And when you know that you're coming from your spiritual identity as your true identity, and your humanity and your human identity is almost like a costume that you're
Mhm.
putting on for this particular lifetime, then it shifts your perception of things, because you know that no matter what happens and what experiences you have, you innately are valuable, and you will innately always be able to have the tools to overcome it and to move beyond it and to heal it. But
There's
we
so much.
learn from our difficulties, our adversities, our obstacles, our challenges. That's how in our choices, it keeps us to redefine ourselves. We keep redefining ourselves and redefining ourselves, right? But in essence, we're just sort of peeling off the conditioning that doesn't work so that we can move into our authenticity.
There's
If that,
so much to unpack there, right?
I
Because
know.
and I think um, I didn't catch the first your book that you've already released. What is it called again? Because I think it was a beautiful name, and
It's me, myself, and I.
you myself and I.
So,
But did you called it something different?
yes, it's the series is called The Human Case of Mistaken Identity.
Human. So for anyone listening at home, I think you need to get me, myself, and I, and then the new book is Self
Self
Love:
love, the journey home.
The Journey Home, and then the healing case of mistaken identity. I think that that's profound, because if we look at it in big picture terms at this point, when we're just even looking at the very tip of an iceberg here with this conversation, is that it is those layers that we have to peel back to find out what our core beliefs are, those three
Mm-hmm.
places that you said. And like, speaking to you today, I've definitely realized I've done a lot of great work in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody listening at home, I'll share and I'll be vulnerable with you as a host today. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we were talking about before we hit record is that I have this something that I have to work on. Is there's a fear inside me because anybody who's been following, I was packaged out for my job in November. I decided to step out from behind fear and start this podcast and put myself out there in this state where I would never have imagined. I always wanted to, but I never thought I could be. So I'm in a very vulnerable state hosting this podcast, putting myself out there, showing my face on social media. It's just stuff I didn't do before,
Mm-hmm.
opening myself up for people to say whatever they want or do whatever they want to me, like feeling exposed. But then also there's the sustainability part of it. I'm going to continue to show up doing this podcast, but then my mind is, today was just one of those days where I was like, well, I haven't found a replacement income stream yet to keep me afloat. And, this is weighing heavy on my mind. And Lita shared that this is probably because I don't fully trust
Mm-hmm.
myself and that it will work out. And I think that I feel it really accurate, because there's that gnawing fear
Mm-hmm.
that creeps up.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to do the work of figuring out where that comes from and how to. I've done so much work, Lita, and people listening. I've talked about this before, and when you're talking about when you're sitting down and you're actually looking at these fears and peeling back these layers, that you have to be non-judgmental, and almost like a witness to your own life.
Mm-hmm.
That ties right in with the fact that you have to be kind to yourself. When you're
Mm-hmm.
doing this work, you have to show yourself kindness like you would a child,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we
And
tend to be kinder with others always than we are with our own self.
absolutely. So I think that that's the piece, right? So that's where I'm at right now, and I know I'm making notes because there's things that you said since we started the podcast. So I'm like, oh, I got to work on that too, because I'm never going to stop growing and learning, and this vulnerability and this fear, I want to figure out what that is. I want to figure out how come I don't trust myself. And I know that it's only been a few months and it's new to me and it takes time. Like what
Well, we
you're
need to understand that life, number one, is a process. Everybody's concerned with getting to the destination,
Mhm.
but it's in the process where all the magic happens. It's in the process where we evolve,
I would agree with that 100%. And I
right? So, and sometimes the way is not linear. It's not a straight road. It's got its twists and its turns and its offshoots. And that too is by design because we can learn something from every experience that we have if we come at it from that perspective. If we look at all of our experiences as a teacher on the road of our own evolution, it shifts the way we perceive everything, and it neutralizes our emotional triggers overall. When we understand that as spiritual beings having a human experience, that we come in with our own, with a sense of value is inherent, it's innate to who we are. What does it mean to be a spiritual being? It means you have an innate compass. It means that you already have inner guidance and wisdom. It means that your inspiration is coming from somewhere greater than the life that you're living, right? And most people don't realize that, but that is your foundation. Because when you know that you are a spiritual being and your value is inherent, it's not going to then be predicated on either what you achieve, what you do, or what someone else says about you. And
Mhm.
you won't care because you won't react to it. When I know that I have value and I derive my sense of value from within me, then I'm not giving my power away to anybody else. Because when we give our power away and we're constantly looking for external validation, we're at the mercy of everybody else. And our
Absolutely.
life is going to be this constant emotional roller coaster of self assessment based on someone else, as opposed to who we think we are. And we don't trust ourselves because we haven't learned to trust ourselves. Our social conditioning knocks it out of us. We grow up believing that everybody else, maybe, the adults around us know more than us. Our teachers know more than us. Our coaches know more than us. This expert knows more than you. But, when yoga teachers tell you you are your own guru, you are. What does that really mean? It means that you know what's best for you. You just don't know how to access that. And this is why it's very important to have moments of, whether you call it meditation, self contemplation, self reflection. It doesn't matter what you call it. But when you're sitting in the silence and in the stillness, we're afraid to be alone. We're
Mm.
afraid to be alone. We can't be alone. We're going to put on, television, or we're going to be scrolling, or we're going to be doing something, as opposed to just being, just sitting in that stillness. Because it's in that stillness when you start to access that aspect of you, that inner wisdom. And when you maintain that state of neutrality and observation while doing it, that's where the discernment comes in, the clarity comes in. Then you're going to know what the answer is. And the more you do this, the more you build your self-trust. And then your self-confidence barometer is going to rise as well. But many times, because we don't learn to trust ourselves, we haven't learned that from very young, because we always have somebody else telling us what we should be doing and what's better for us,
Mm.
right? We don't learn to self-assess.
So one of the key takeaways from this call that I hope that it will resonate with people that are watching or listening is that I think we do spend a lifetime of asking, do we measure up to
Right.
what
Whatever standards.
the world is set for us?
Correct.
But I think what we need to actually start doing is asking ourselves, do we measure up to ourselves? And there's work that needs to be done to get there, clearly, because we have to really get in touch with our spiritual self and like, what is our innate value? What is our innate beliefs?
And that
Or,
also predicates that you have to ask yourself, what are your expectations for yourself?
and I think there's going to be some people, and even me, sometimes I get frustrated and I have like this gnawing thing in the back of my mind. I think it's because there has been so much noise since we were children.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's like, well, I don't know what I
Right.
truly want for myself because I've been chasing the dream or this ideology that it has to be, I have to be educated. I have to have this job by this age. I have to have a house. I have to have 2.5 kids. All of these different
Right.
things. I never understood the 2.5 children part, right? Because I'm like, who wants half a child? Like, don't you want the whole one? But anyway, it's just, so I think that's the noise, and that's what you're talking about, is we can strip back all of that over time,
Mm-hmm.
and with the help of your book and your series, to learn how to do this, remain neutral when we're doing it, because we can't do it with judgment, and we can't be mean to ourselves once we realize that maybe our whole lives is based on somebody else's truth, but not our own.
Right. And the key is to move out of the judgment and the criticism,
Yes.
because, one of the other things that, I talk about is we have to pay attention to our self-talk.
I want to read, I
Because,
found it. I want to read this real quick. So I found the
okay, go
part
ahead.
that I was talking about. So on her page, under Hey, It's Lita, she had said that internal person was silenced more and more as she grew up and became everything her parents, culture, and society wanted her to be. But inside, she was lost, dying, her sense of self crowded by the external voices and demands. That self was not allowed to breathe for fear of rejection, abandonment, judgment, and criticism. It was constantly squashed, causing excruciating emotional pain, because there is no pain greater than that of separation from self.
And that's self-betrayal.
And that's powerful.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that, and it was just like, oh, okay. But
And
yeah,
you know what? That is my story. That is my story, because I was the youngest in my family. And, we had a set of guidelines and rules and all kinds of things that we had to follow, and what we had to be and not be, and who we had to please to believe that we were good people. And, there was a whole caboodle
yeah,
of, defining behaviors that we had to adapt. And what I found as I got older and older is that, God, this is killing me. This is killing me. And it's killing me internally, because I'm not living based on what I know to be true.
you're living somewhere else.
Right. And because as we're growing up, we want to fit in, we don't want to be judged, and we're afraid of rejection and abandonment. These are very core wounds that most of humanity carries. And I talk about this in the second book in more detail. And it got to the point where, and all of us, and I'm sure many people will attest to this on their journeys, when we have obstacles that come our way or challenges. And they could be a divorce, it could be an illness, it could be the loss of, someone very dear to us, whatever that obstacle or challenge it is that you're facing. As much as we will feel uncomfortable and in pain, that's our liberating agent right there, because that's going to make us stop in our tracks and say, what am I doing here? Who am I? Where am I going? Why am I here? Why am I living this life? Why am I spending my time doing all these things? And I'm walking away and I'm unfulfilled and I'm not happy and I don't have well-being. And I feel like I'm on this hamster wheel that everyone's saying I should be on, but it's just not working for me. And we're afraid almost to live the life that we really want to.
Mhm.
But that's the life that we need to live, the one that is calling to your heart. But you won't know what it is unless you sit in your stillness, in connection with yourself and in connection with your spiritual self to know what that is. That's where you're going to get those answers from. And, a lot of times we can, something happens in our life and we call our friends and they'll tell us, do this, or they'll give us advice. And it's all very well meaning. But you can listen to all of it, take what you resonate with, but you still have to sit with yourself.
Yeah.
There's no way to bypass the inner work. There are no
Well,
shortcuts here. And we are a society of shortcuts. We want everything in 3 steps, 2 tips. I want to have it all done by tomorrow because we're in that instant gratification. And it really doesn't work that way. There's no 21 days to anything. It's a process. Even when someone says to you, 3 steps for this, 21 days for that diet, whatever it is, that's a pressure right there.
mhm.
So if you can't get there and you're now harboring a sense of failure,
Yeah.
and all of that has to come off the table. Everybody works at their own pace. It's not a race. It's not a competition. And we should not be comparing ourselves to one another. We're all here for different reasons. And we're all unique in and of ourselves. And that's what you have to find about yourself.
The healing journey is not linear. You mentioned this before, and I know this to be true because
Right.
it hasn't been linear for me. And anybody who's actually followed along with this podcast will actually know that at 35, something happened in my life that caused me to just change so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I started to sit with myself and listen and
Mm-hmm.
actually show myself kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And, now I'm approaching 43.
Mm-hmm.
So, a few short months. And I can tell you that over the past, 8 years, my life has changed in such monumental ways of things that I did not even believe were possible. And how, someone might say, well, what is it? I'm like, well, I'm a happy person. Like, I do have that. I'm a positive by default person. I enjoy life. I love people's stories. I see the world differently. I see beauty in pain. I see beauty in love because they're all experiences that we have to go through. And that's what balances out this life that we have. And for me, I look at it and I just want anybody listening that this conversation has resonated with and that you can change. But just as Lita just said, there's no easy route to this. You have to do the work. You have to sit with yourself. You have to reflect. You're not trying to measure up to anybody. You're trying to measure up to yourself. And but it's possible. That's the beauty of it. It is
Shifts,
possible.
growth, and evolution were designed for that. The question is, are we going to embrace it and do the work, or are we just going to kind of bury it under the rug? And what happens when we bury it under the rug? It's just going to come and tap us on the shoulder next go round. And life is going to keep bringing you circumstances, people, situations that are going to push you out of your comfort zone so that you can heal the things that no longer serve you, to take you to the next step of your evolution.
I love it, because now, after talking with you today, I do know that there's a couple areas that I need to work on to heal
All
myself
of us, yeah.
for the next. But and I think that that's it too, right? I I know now, 8 years in my tenure of changing my internal dialogue, that
Mm-hmm.
I've come so far,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm so grateful for that work that I've done. But by no means do I know or believe that I am close to being finished. And that's a part of what I like about myself, is that I'm open to continuing to learn. And then with this podcast, meeting someone like you who talks or speaks to a part of my brain that may I was not conscious of. And then I'm like, oh, those aha moments where you're like,
Right,
wait
right,
a second,
right.
I do have some work to do, to go
Yeah,
inside. And maybe in a few months I might be closer to having less actual fear or wanting to take full control of the
right,
situation where I need to just trust myself.
right. So what happens, humanity, right? Most people, they don't start to think about the way they move in the world until something hits them.
Mm,
We don't think about shifting our behaviors or our belief systems until something happens to us, which, could be something that causes us any kind of suffering or pain or fear or discomfort, whatever it might be. But that's the crossroad, because that's where your free will choice, our free will choice, comes in, where we can say, where we can ask the question and say, all right, I could do this the way I've always done it and just keep going on with my patterns. And we know where that's going to take me,
mm,
right? Or I can be brave. I can step into the unknown despite my fear and grab this bull by the horns and really heal, give myself the compassion, the forgiveness, the grace to heal what is happening. It's not a condemnation of I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm not this, I'm not that, blah, blah, blah. No, it's I love myself enough that I really want to heal this so that I can move into a space where I am living a more purposeful life, a more contented life, a more fulfilled life, a happier life, whatever that means to you.
yeah.
Right? But in order to have that optimum well being, it starts from within. It
Yes.
really does. And, when people kind of hear that word inner work, they start to, I have some of my clients break out in hives. They're like, what are we doing now? And then, as they move through, and I help them move through the aspects of their life and their challenges, and it's always wonderful for me to see kind of when they start to come out on the other side and they have those aha moments, right? Those moments where consciousness starts to come in, where they sort of awaken to something new, they're like, oh, this is so much better. I can't believe I spent so much time in XYZ mode, or believing this or believing that. There's no right or wrong. There's no judgment. There's no comparison. Comparison with others, right? And I myself, who've been doing this for so long now, I still do all my own work. I'm not triggered as much anymore. I've done it so much that I'm in a very neutral, even keeled place of peace. So, but there are moments, because I'm human and I'm still on my own process and journey, and things will come up. And just the way I'm explaining it to you, I sit down and I say to myself, oh, I walk away and I'm like, all right, Lita, as I talk to myself, what was that about? What's going on there? You know, where did that come from?
Thank you. Everyone at home, me, myself, and I. It's available pretty much everywhere, but you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. and it's a part of the series, as she said, The Human Case of Mistaken Identity, by Lita Mitrofanis.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. And then she has another book coming out this spring, and this is called Self Love: The Journey Home.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So I hope if you've been listening that this has resonated with you as it has me. And just, I think it's about accepting the fact that wherever you are at in your life, we already have the tools to
We
heal
do.
ourselves.
We do.
We just got to do the work. And the
We do.
work doesn't have to happen overnight. And it's not going to be a 21 days mental fix. It's going to be a lifelong commitment to,
Yourself.
yeah.
To yourself.
Rita, thank you so much for coming on this
Thank
podcast.
you
It has
so
been
much
a
for
pleasure.
having me. And
I'm,
we I know we're going to have a lot more conversations
I do
as we
believe that
unpack
myself.
everything, because it's hard
Yes,
to unpack everything in one session. But thank you so much for having me. This has been terrific. And, you know where to reach me. All your listeners are, they can feel free to go onto my social media. I have articles and all kinds of little tidbits and things. I love to hear from people. And onwards we move.
perfect. And just, it's for anybody that's listening, I'm going to link it as well on the description. But for on Instagram, it is simply underscore Leda, Leda, all
Okay.
lowercase is her handle, and you'll be able to find her there. And keep an eye out for her book coming out soon. And until next time, everybody, go out there and live your wildest dreams.
Thank you.